I spoke to the vice president yesterday, shortly after I spoke to the president. You know what we focused on? Defeating Donald Trump. I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals. This is a deeply personal decision that the vice president will make. She will make it on her own timetable and her own timeline. She needs to choose someone that she's prepared to govern with, campaign with, and someone that she feels most comfortable with. And that decision should be made free of any sort of political.
Sir, are you interested in the job?
I'm focused on doing my job here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, one of the handful of names on everybody's short list. Of course, the decision for running mate will be Vice President Kamala Harris's and hers alone. But that is one of the people that folks are talking about. Basil, Claire, Matt, and John are back with us. Claire, Speaker Pelosi also out with an endorsement of the vice president today. Just tell us a little bit more about how this happened and your understanding of the final hours and the final days of conversations between Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Leader Jeffries and President Joe Biden.
Well, I think Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and even Nancy Pelosi, to some extent, were really working quietly behind the scenes just to make sure that Joe Biden understood what it felt like to other Democrats that were going to be on the ballot. These are people that are facing the electorate. And I think from the Senate side, there was particular concern about the gap between Democratic senators in swing states and where Joe Biden was about a week and a half, 2 weeks after the debate. So they brought that data respectfully to him and asked him to think about it. They were merely forwarding the concerns of their members, which is their job. And then I think what really happened over the weekend was the campaign itself had asked for data, had actually gone out and done polling. And I think his two closest aides, Steve Ricchetti and Mike Donilon, sat down with him with that information on Saturday and over the weekend. And they looked not only to see that they were losing ground in the battleground states, but that other states were actually seeing movement that was very troubling. States that had gone from being slightly purple to pretty blue over the last few cycles. Places like New Mexico, New Jersey, Colorado, Minnesota, Virginia. These were all New Hampshire. These were all places that, frankly, the Biden campaign had seen as safe. And all of a sudden it appeared they might not be. And I think that that's when the president realized, I need to do this so that the values that our party cares about and the country I love so dearly is led by someone who will do the right thing instead of someone who has demonstrated over and over they only know how to do the wrong thing.
And with that sort of understanding, let me show you what Joe Biden was able to turn that, what had to be painful moment or moments on Saturday into. This is Leader Hakeem Jeffries today.
And let me say this, that Vice President Kamala Harris has excited the community. She's excited the House Democratic Caucus, and she's exciting the country. In terms of my Republican colleagues, former President Donald Trump and extreme MAGA Republicans are having a meltdown right now, a complete and total meltdown. Why? Because their presidential nominee is unpopular. The extreme MAGA Republican policies are unpopular, including trying to impose a nationwide abortion ban on the American people, and their Project 2025 is unpopular. They're having a meltdown right now. All we want to do as Democrats is have a debate about moving the country forward and continuing to put people over politics.
So, Basil, there are a lot of things that are extraordinary about Kamala Harris. All indications are that she will be the nominee. One of them is the bumper sticker writes itself. That never happens in campaigns. But prosecutor meet felon. I mean, here we go, day one.
Here we go. And, you know, for years, since she became vice president, I had been concerned, upset that, you know, there were a lot of digs taken at her publicly in print in some ways diminishing her credentials, diminishing her value to the ticket. And I railed against that because I said, when you do that, yes, you diminish her, but you really diminish the sort of future of the party. Now, I'd like to think I'm particularly prescient. I don't know if that was the case, but I did feel that there was going to be a moment in time where, you know, the ticket needed to be elevated in a way that, unfortunately, in many ways, was being attacked. I've talked about it, written about it, but what is gratifying to see is that everyone, and everyone on this today has talked about this, that there was such a rallying around her, and that all of the things that people may have talked about as being potentially negative, her being a prosecutor, is now front and center. That talent, that skill set is now front and center in being able to prosecute a convicted felon who's a recidivist, who is actually is going to be standing across from her. And it changes the whole dynamic, changes the whole narrative. And I just want to say this quick point, that she's going to be attacked on policy. She's going to be attacked on immigration and migrants and crime and all of these things. But we also have to be careful and be mindful, I should say, of the fact that there are going to be two levels to this criticism. One is going to be a policy criticism, but one is an ad hominem criticism that's just below that. So if they're going to attack her on migrants and immigration, but they're also going to start attacking her on her own ethnicity, being of a child of Jamaican and South Asian parentage. She's going to be attacked on the economy, but in sort of underneath that, she's also going to be attacked on whether or not she earned the job that she has and is prepared to get the job that she's campaigning for. We've already seen those attacks. The New York Post called her the DEI president. We have already also seen attacks on her gender. If you listen to the way some are talking in some of the social media, that's talked about the way she laughs, the way she dresses. You know, I've seen that before and up close working for Hillary Clinton. So these racialized and gendered attacks are coming, and have already started. And I have always been concerned that those who were asking Joe Biden to step down, I hope they use that same energy to defend Kamala Harris should that time come. Well, the time has come. And so as everybody's unifying politically, and as the money is coming together, just remember that there has to be this really strong defense of her and of the ticket coming.
Basil, say more about what that defense looks. I saw that. I think Elon Musk amplified that smear about DEI. Just can you say more about, because I think the people that smear are on the other side. The people that want to defend may not know exactly how to do that the most effectively. Can you give your thoughts on how that's done?
The most important thing, in my view, is the one defense that I think covers all of it. When people say, I'm not sure if a black woman can win, you stop it right there. The biggest challenge is the doubt. That doubt as to whether or not the country is ready. I don't know if the country's ready, but I'm going to cast my ballot. You have to cast your ballot. She's ready, you have to be ready. If she didn't think she could do it, she probably wouldn't. So if she's at that place, you have to be at that place also. So to me, the first defense against all of this is the seeding of the doubt and to get rid of that. But secondly, and very quickly, listen, I think this country has already proven that it can elect women to top offices, New York, Michigan, elsewhere, even her home state in California, where she was elected senator. Claire McCaskill, for example, is a shining example of